Thank you all for coming. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk to people. What I want to do today is actually talk about things that are actually here, things that are new, things that are clinical treatments that are going to happen, and a really interesting clinical trial for type 1 that we're hoping to start in Q1 next year, and that JDRF funding dependent. So we love the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. They're absolutely fantastic. And we love Diabetes SA as well, of course. The other thing that we love is the Royal Adelaide Hospital, which is much maligned in the press. Whatever you read in the advertiser, do not believe it. It is a fantastic institution with very dedicated people who are really focused on doing the right thing. And it really annoys me the way the institution is portrayed at the moment. So bear with us. It's a good place. Right, so we're talking about our friend insulin, and that the job of our friend insulin is to take glucose and put it inside the cell. In type 2 diabetes, the problem is not that you haven't got insulin, but you generally have got insulin resistance. That is, something about your cells stops the insulin working and the sugar being unable to get into the cell. So type 1, you have an insulin deficiency. Type 2, you have a relative insulin deficiency based on the fact that the molecule doesn't work. If you last for long enough with type 2 diabetes, the pancreas fails and you end up essentially having the same problem of not enough insulin. So this is the little critter that's responsible for all of this. This is the pancreatic beta cell that sits within the pancreas. And the pancreas is a fascinating organ that we're going to talk a little bit more about, and I'll bring you up to date with what's exactly happening in the transplant unit. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease, the cause of which we don't know. There's a fantastic Adelaide-based study that Jenny Cooper's running out of the Women's and Children's Hospital called the ENDIA study, which is actually looking at the environmental determinants of type 1 diabetes. And I expect at least you'll probably hear from Jenny at one of these sort of seminars, but that's really cutting-edge stuff that's coming, again, out of South Australia. So the problem with this is that we have an immune attack on the beta cells, the cells that make the insulin. So it's an immune problem. It's not with type 1 anything to do with lifestyle or anything like that. It is a specific immune defect. And this is an old slide, which again I like to show because it really makes the point that if you have a child with type 1 diabetes and you're going to treat them for 10 years, that's 15,000 needles. And so what they did in Canberra was they stuck 15,000 syringes in the lawn and Parliament House just to point this out to our politicians, that that's the burden that families have to cope with this. And that's a photograph that I took, and I like it and I use it a lot. There are lots of really great technologies coming in type 1, and I think Jessica's going to talk about some of them after the break. Really good things. The closed-loop systems with the insulin pumps, I think, is absolutely fantastic new technology. And we don't regard, any of us who work in type 1, we don't regard any of our solutions or our treatments as being the sole treatment that you're going to have. You have to be complementary, and you have to pick and choose the best of what's around. So for some people, some of the things I'm talking about today will be right. For some people, the closed-loop systems will be, because it's all about trying to tailor the treatment to the individual. So I should have updated this slide. It's 97 years now, and still a major triumph. And the next time you read about an orthopaedic surgeon, what you have to remember is that insulin was discovered by an orthopaedic surgeon. So that's Banting over there. So Banting discovered this with his medical student Best over there, and studied this in dogs. And here's the first person, Leonard Thompson, was treated with insulin, 1922. This went from bench to bedside in 8 months. That will never, ever happen again. You cannot take a treatment from an experimental approach into the clinic in less than probably about 5 to 7 years, the way things that currently are at the moment. And that's one of the problems for people with type 1 and type 2, is that you hear us coming along and talking about all these things, thinking, why isn't this going to happen? And there's lots of regulation that goes around the outside of it. So yeah, you're all familiar with what insulin's actually like. So diabetes is a multi-system disease, whether it's type 1 or type 2, that affects the kidney, which is my other day job, the nerves, the eyes, amputations, the heart, and the blood vessels. So without being negative, it's a major burden on all of our health system. And it causes a lot of complications. We won't go into those in any great detail tonight, but obviously kidney failure is something that I deal a lot with in my other job. And despite the improvements in the insulins that we've got, we still shortens, if you have type 1, life on average between 10 and 15 years. And you can appreciate that's a significant economic burden to people and burden to the health system. So it would be good if we could do something about it. So those cells that we talked about that make the insulin are 1% of this organ called the pancreas. Okay, 99% of it is digestive enzymes that help you absorb your food, and they don't get damaged at all by the type 1 diabetic process. They are generally remain intact. We'll talk towards the end of my presentation about a really interesting new program that we've got for dealing with pancreatitis and the diabetes that potentially happens with that, and cystic fibrosis, which is a disease of the pancreas, which is another thing that we're now offering here in South Australia. So I guess, I'm not a surgeon, I'm a physician, but it's always appealed to me, the idea of a surgical treatment for this disease. This was the disease, the first cure was discovered by a surgeon, so why wouldn't we look for surgical treatments to potentially manage it? And what we really want to do is replace the beta cell, replace the cell that's been for type 1 that's been damaged by this autoimmune process. And so there are two ways you can do that. You can transplant the whole pancreas, which we're going to talk about in a minute, or you can transplant the islets, and I'm not talking about things that aren't here yet. Potentially we will be able to generate beta cells from stem cells, but that's still a little bit further down the track. So I actually really wanted to talk about things today that are actually clinical reality and not something that's over the horizon yet again. So my philosophy with type 1 diabetes and indeed with type 2 diabetes is that we need to get in before it's too late. And I think one of the problems with the system that we've got at the moment is that for people with type 1 who've had it for many years, they get the vascular complications, the eye complications, the cardiac complications, because unfortunately it's too long before we can actually correct the problem, which is to give the insulin secreting cells back. So I guess that's my sort of philosophical worldview, is that we should really be aiming to try to get in and restore normal sugar if we can, as quickly as we possibly can. And this is just a CAT scan that shows hardening of the arteries in somebody with type 1 diabetes. So replacing that, the whole pancreas with a pancreas transplant requires someone to have type 1 diabetes. In our program, which has just started, which we're going to talk about tonight, aged less than 55. In the other programs that run around the country, it's age less than 50. You have to have advanced chronic kidney disease at the moment to be eligible for a pancreas transplant. And it's a very big operation. It's a little bit like, I say, a kidney transplant's like running a marathon, because it's about a 4-hour operation. A kidney pancreas transplant is a 9-hour operation, so you can think of that as an ultra marathon. And that's one of the reasons that people have to have a very strong cardiovascular system to be able to do that. It's much easier if people aren't overweight, and we recognise that's difficult with diabetes because insulin's a hormone that Jessica will tell you later on does tend to promote the gain of weight, and you've got to have patent blood vessels to be able to do all the plumbing to put everything in and on. So pancreas transplants, as I said, started in 1967, so they're 51 years old this year. And there's several ways that you can do this. You can do this with a pancreas by itself. You can do it with a pancreas after a kidney transplant, or you can do what probably is the preferred procedure, which is a simultaneous kidney and pancreas transplant, which is what we show, just showing you down the bottom. And this is an old study, but it's an important study because it basically shows that after a simultaneous kidney pancreas transplant, there's about 10,000 people in that study, significant survival advantage once you've got over the first 3 months, significantly improved by doing that compared to conventional therapy being insulin. So you've got a stormy initial period, but once you're over that, the odds, if you have a simultaneous kidney pancreas, really favour you. Sorry for the gory slides. A kidney pancreas transplant, what you're seeing up here is the pancreas on the left-hand side and the kidney on the right-hand side, both sides of the abdomen. And a cut that sometimes looks a little bit like that, and drainage tubes that come out. The biggest problem with transplanting a whole organ like the pancreas is it's got a very small blood vessel or very small blood vessels, and you can appreciate that people who've got diabetes or type 1 who've already got damaged blood vessels, that might be relatively, you could compromise the blood flow to that organ. And so the major thing that we worry most about is actually the pancreas clotting off when we've transplanted it. So we use strong blood thinners when we do a pancreas transplant to keep the circulation patent. The problem with doing that is that if you use blood thinners, you increase the risk of people bleeding. So you're balancing these two clinical things. So if you have a pancreas transplant, you've got about a 20% chance, or 1 in 5 chance, of having to go back to theatre for a second operation after your first ultramarathon. So again, you can appreciate it's quite a significant thing. The other issues that can happen are infection, pancreatitis, which of course is inflammation of the pancreas. And I don't shy away from this. It's a dangerous procedure. There's a 2% mortality. Now that doesn't sound like much, but 2% is actually 1 in 50. So you've got to be very careful that the people that we put forward, we make sure that we think they are absolutely fit. So we don't push the boundaries. Having said all that, the outcome of these transplants is absolutely remarkable. So we'll talk about referral and listing, but basically endocrinologists are the people that would refer. Generally, most people who are coming up for a pancreas with a kidney have got kidney failure, so they're tending to see both. They'll see an endocrinologist and a kidney specialist, so it becomes a group decision. And although this is an old slide, which I got from my interstate colleagues who say transplant within 2 to 3 years, as I say, my aim is to try to get South Australians transplanted with South Australian organs before they ever get to needing dialysis. That's how I think we should actually be doing things. Very good operations. This is just the number that have been performed at Westmead and Monash in Australia. And when this graph next comes out next year, there'll be another new small line, which will be the South Australian line that's starting. And the survival, this is a large number. They've done over 600, and this is from the latest registry report. The survival of the pancreas and patient survival is very, very good at 15 years, being well over 75, and that compares very well with the rest of the world. So it's a good treatment when it happens. So what about South Australian patients? And this is data that Jessica Stranks helped me generate a few years ago. So we look back at 70 people with type 1 between 1994 and 2014. And a number of them had kidney alone transplants. A number of them had living donor kidney transplants. 34 of these 70 patients had the definitive procedure, which is the simultaneous pancreas and kidney, and only one had a pancreas after kidney. So that was interesting, and the results are pretty good. But what I'd just like to point out, now this is not a randomised trial, but the people who got the simultaneous pancreas with the kidney did better than the deceased donor kidneys, or the people who got by themselves, or the people who just got living kidney. And that's because when you transplant 2 organs together, one organ protects the other. So if you're fit enough to have the bigger procedure, it's the better of the 2 procedures to actually have. So what do we need to do pancreas transplants in Adelaide? Well, we need patients with type 1 diabetes, which we have, so no problem there. We need organs, which we're generally a good hospital for a good state for that sort of thing. We need surgical and hospital manpower, which we didn't have until about 2 years ago. So the big thing is that we've acquired a very experienced pancreas surgeon from the UK, whose name is Dr. Shantanu Bhattacharya, who has been involved with the largest transplant program in the UK, which is now one of the largest transplant programs in the world, which is the Oxford transplant program. So we're a satellite of Oxford, if you like. I have excellent kidney transplant surgeons, and we've been trooping all over the world, sneaking and looking at other people's programs to work out what the best bits were to bring them back. So we've been to Oxford and we've been to the Mayo Clinic in the United States. So the Adelaide program, which has now started, and you haven't seen much about it in the news because we haven't done a big news announcement, but we're about to do that in the next week or two, because we've completed our first 2, is different from what you would get if you went to Monash or to Westmead, which are the other 2 places that provide this procedure in Australia. And the big difference is that this is a program that is steroid-free, so we don't use prednisolone. The other 2 programs use prednisolone. But the Oxford program, which, as I say, is the largest one in the world, has always been steroid-free. And that makes a lot of sense because corticosteroids are bad for pancreas. In fact, if you go onto steroids for some other reason, you often become diabetic. So it's a little bit silly to be transplanting a delicate organ and using a drug that you know is likely to make you diabetic. So it's been very attractive and appealing to me that we might have a steroid-free approach. We're aiming between 3 to 5 of these per year. I think that's going to grow. We've done 2 already this year, and we could have done 1 today, believe it or not, if things the stars had aligned. So the organs are out there, and we will potentially expand to type 2s, but not straight away. So that again is a difference to what's happening interstate. And as I say, immunosuppression is different. So I just want to point out that we are a good organ donor state, and if you're going to do one or several things I'm going to ask you to do after this, I want you to talk to people about organ donation. It's really important that people have their wills, their wishes expressed. This is since 2014 we had 128 people that could potentially have been pancreas donors. We referred 32 of those organs for simultaneous kidney pancreas transplant, of which only 9 were transplanted. Okay, the remainder were not used. So you can appreciate that's a disappointment to me, and it's a waste. And it's largely because of the logistics of trying to get an organ interstate to these transplant programs, because we didn't have the ability to use those organs here. We had a number of islets, and we did some islet transplants, which we'll talk very briefly about in a minute. The other thing is donation after cardiac death. That's a different type of organ donor. These DCD donors are used in the United Kingdom. They're not being used at all in Australia, and I think that's because the 2 programs that exist are very good programs, but they become very conservative and very picky about what they actually do. I think we should be trying to expand rather than sit. We can all do perfect things if we only do a very small number of them, but that's not actually serving the needs of the people that need the organs. So we have to be a little bit more proactive, I think. So again, we'll be a program that's open to DCD donors in the future. So this is our first simultaneous pancreas kidney recipient. This is Kimberly. She's wearing her kidney and pancreas islet t-shirt that her husband made for her. And she's from Mount Gambier, and she's been out of hospital now with a normal blood sugar for the last 2 months. So she's the first one, and the second one also doing extremely well. So there will be an announcement shortly when we can try and find somebody that wants to hear some positive news about the Royal Adelaide Hospital. So my vision, Colonel Light's vision, is that we should be transplanting all of people with type 1 with advanced kidney disease before they end up on dialysis and have the risks for dialysis. And the way that you do that is by having a program in your own state that can take advantage and can be sort of self-sufficient. So that's the plan. And certainly we know that we're putting about 3 to 5 people with type 1 onto dialysis each year. So we could actually be preventing that and avoiding those healthcare costs and really doing a significant benefit for those people by offering this program. So the other thing that I'm sort of known from is this, which is islet cell transplantation. And I want to talk to you about this other, so that's a new program, the whole pancreas, which you hadn't heard about 2 years ago when I gave this talk. So, and it's here and it's real. This has been going since 2006. And it's, everybody's seen this, many people have seen this cartoon before. The idea here is that we isolate the islets, we give the islets back into the liver of somebody who's with type 1 diabetes, and that the liver makes the insulin that's required. There are 3 centres, St Vincent's in Melbourne, Westmead with Phil O'Connell, and us here at the Royal Adelaide, and Queen Elizabeth initially, but now Royal Adelaide. And it is a remarkable treatment. So this lady had a transplant with us in 2010. And you can see she had very chaotic blood sugars. And she, which you can see on the top over there, she had no C-peptide, because when your pancreas is working, pancreas, it's a bit like Henry Ford's production line. Off as an insulin comes out, a C-peptide molecule comes out at the same time. Insulin's actually quite hard to measure in the blood, but C-peptide hangs around for a lot longer. So we know that if there's C-peptide in the blood, that there's a viable source of insulin-secreting tissue. So you can see down the bottom here that before the transplant she had no C-peptide, and you can see her insulin requirement on the bottom of these grafts. So she had her first islet transplant, and then roughly 170 days later, she had a second islet transplant. You can see she made more C-peptide after the second transplant. The insulin requirement came down, and she's now been 8 years insulin independent, or the diabetes has been cured for 8 years by that transplant procedure. During that time, the retinopathy that she had is completely resolved. The peripheral neuropathy that she had, the nerve damage, is completely resolved. She's gone back to working full-time, got her license back, got her life back. Very, very rewarding to be involved in that, but it's rewarding, but it's also a challenge, because it means I want to do more of this for more people, because I can see the benefits of doing this. If we can get enough insulin-secreting tissue in, then we can have these absolutely terrific outcomes. So our two in the initial trial that we did, 2 out of the 4 patients that we did have done really well. 8 years insulin independent and 7.5 years insulin independent for 2 of them. So it's good, but it's not perfect. When we compare it with best other therapy, particularly for people who've got hypoglycemic unawareness, this is conventional insulin, medium and very intensive insulin treatment. There's no doubt that an islet transplant is much better for dealing with hypoglycemia than the conventional therapies is. So if you've got difficult hypos, an islet transplant or a whole pancreas are very good treatments for it. Okay. If I was summarising where we're at with islets, I could certainly say it's improving, and it's better since every year the outcomes actually improve. We're lucky that our government pays for it here. A lot of other places around the world, they don't. And it's not reimbursed in the United States, which is interesting, not yet. So we're ahead of the US from that point of view. So I think my view on this is that we could do better. We're not quite as good as the outcomes that you'll get with a simultaneous kidney pancreas. But again, the risk of having this procedure, which is much milder, much safer procedure to have than a whole pancreas. But the benefit, if the whole pancreas goes well and you're well enough for it, the whole pancreas is an excellent, and you've got kidney failure, it's an excellent treatment for that. So you can see, again, the theme here is that not all technologies are going to suit everybody, and you need a range of people doing a range of things to provide the best treatment for the individual patient. But this is a form of treatment that we have here, and we're lucky to have here, and it's in real time, and it's not science fiction. Okay. So this is what the islets look like. These are beautiful islets. Oh my God, they're beautiful islets. These are the sort of things that if I get a chance to transplant, they're just absolute gold. It's a big deal when we do this. You could just about sell tickets for it, I tell you. So this is our interventional theatre, one of our interventional theatres. This is actually the old RA, but we have something very similar at the new RA. And you can see there's lots of big deal for an islet transplant at the moment, because it's given into the liver, like I showed you. So you've got surgeons, you've got anaesthetists, you've got medical students, you've got nursing students, you've got 5 of my lab people who want to see what's going on. We're all there watching what's going on. These procedures cost about $180,000 each, so they are not cheap procedures to do, but the government reimburses us for them. And as I said before, we're transplanting into the liver. So I've just done a little cartoon here that shows the islets in green sitting inside the liver. Now the liver, and people say, well, why do you put them in the liver? And the answer is because that's where we put them. That's the current gold standard for where the cells go. Okay? But it's a terrible place. It's an awful place to put a cell, particularly a very delicate cell like the islet. These cells are very oxygen sensitive, and the oxygen pressure in the liver is actually very low. The liver is the great clearinghouse for all of the toxins that come out of the bowel. So the blood supply from the bowel goes straight to the liver, where the liver detoxifies everything that comes out. All of the wretched drugs that I have to use to transplant people are all metabolized in the liver. Okay. There are these immune cells called the Kupffer cells, which are like policemen, and they live there gobbling up anything that's foreign, is there to protect us. There are high glucose levels. These cells are very sensitive to glucose, so you don't really want them to be overstimulated, particularly before they've got a new blood supply. So it's really a surprise to me that, and also ischemia, because they don't revascularize. It's a surprise to me that this works at all. And in fact, we reliably estimate that when we do one of these procedures, we lose 75% of the cells that we have in the first 24 hours, because they just don't survive being transplanted into this crazy place. So the fact that I've got, women, a couple of patients, we've got patients around the country, around the world, who are insulin independent for, the longest in the world is now 20 years on an islet transplant. Remarkable that it should work. But you can also see, as a scientist, that there's a challenge there, because obviously any small difference that you can make there is going to have an incremental flow on and is going to potentially make this treatment available for more people, which is really been the focus of my last couple of years' research, and the JDRF international money that you heard about at the beginning. So lots of reasons that we don't like this. The other thing that I really don't like about it, I'm not going to show it, but is that we can't actually get those cells out. Once we put them in, if there's something wrong with them, you're stuck with them. Okay. Now that's not a problem for islets as they are at the moment, but if we're thinking about stem cell-based treatments or even pig cell-based treatments, which are coming, really are coming, I'm not really sure that I'd want to put my 12-year-old with type 1 and give them something that I couldn't actually get rid of if I needed to later on. So the site's still a problem, and that's why I'm in the encapsulation consortium looking at alternative sites. So I'm not the only person that's had this idea. Lots of other people have been thinking about this for a long time, and people have talked about a variety of places that you might put islets that are not within the liver. So some people are interested in putting them in the muscle or under the skin. Some people have thought about putting them in the thymus, not the thyroid, which I've drawn up there. Some have talked about putting them in the spleen. Obviously, the liver we talked about. Believe it or not, in mice, we will put them under the kidney capsule, and it works really well there, but doesn't work really well under the kidney in humans. Bone marrow, there was a trial from Italy that investigated that. Unfortunately, didn't work. And believe it or not, some people have thought about putting them into the testicle, which would be beneficial for about half the population, but not for the other half, and also could potentially be rather painful. So the obvious site is under the skin. And the reason that I think the skin is obvious is that if we could put them under the skin, it would be potentially minimally invasive. Technically quite easy. We could actually remove them. So if something went wrong, we can, the most junior member of my team, my intern, my 50 medical student, could cut them out and take them away. And we could also image them. And I'm going to show you how this is actually playing forth for a clinical trial that's going to start, we hope, in Q1, that is January next year. So not very far away. So the reason that the skin has been tried in the past and hasn't worked is not enough blood vessels in the skin. And that's where this comes in, which is the biodegradable temporizing matrix. So this is a treatment for burns. So we're fortunate, extraordinarily fortunate in South Australia, that we have one of the best burns units in the world. And it's run by a man called John Greenwood, who was South Australian of the Year two years ago. And he first came to prominence in the Bali bombings. So what he did was when the badly burnt people went from Bali to Darwin, he flew from Adelaide up to Darwin and basically triaged and treated all of these very badly burnt patients. Now, the problem with a really bad burn, particularly a burn such as happens in the Pinery fire that you will have heard about, or the fires in California at the moment, is if you're really very badly burnt, everything goes right down to the muscle, and it will actually burn right down. And the problem with that is that you can't graft that. You can't actually put a skin graft on the top of muscle because there's no blood supply there for it to take. And that's why people with really bad burns die. And they die from kidney failure and other such things. So this will all become apparent why this is important in a minute. So what John spent the last 14 years doing is developing alternative ways to deal with very badly burnt people. And that's what this is, this biodegradable temporizing matrix. It's a polyurethane. It's a biodegradable polyurethane. So it's not a natural substance, it's a man-made substance that, interestingly, bacteria have not evolved ways to deal with, which is kind of helpful in this situation, because you could appreciate somebody who's very badly burnt has usually got a zoo of bugs on them because their skin is broken down and the skin protects you from the bugs. This is roughly what one of the early versions of this looks like on a scanning electron micrograph. And the important thing about this is he's done 3 major trials at least now, and he's actually got this approved through the FDA in the US. So it's actually licensed. It's been in people now, and it's safe, and it's been used to treat very severely badly burnt people. Most recently, the Pinery forest burns. Apologies for the gruesome bit, but he tested this, or the first way he tested this was in what's called a free flap study. So if you look at that over there on day 0, so a free flap is if you have unfortunate enough to have a nasty tumour on the face or something like that, to reconstruct that, what a plastic surgeon will do is take a piece of skin that's on the end of a blood vessel, okay, and then you need the vessel and you need the skin, and you take it out of the forearm, and then you use that to reconstruct up on the face. And that creates a wound. So the first thing that he did with his biodegradable matrix, having spent a long time working this out in animal models, and I don't apologise for that, he created this the material that you're seeing being passed around there, and filled the defect with it. You can see by day 5, it's turned bright red. See that? Okay. And then by day 15, it's still looking very, very, very red. Day 22, day 36, what he's done is he's peeled off the polyurethane layer on the top, and you can see beautiful blood vessels have formed in that space, which he can then safely graft. Now, what's so clever about this is, and this fits with other things that he's up to at the moment, is what he's done with this is now temporized that wound. So he's stabilised that defect that was created. There's no contracture, there's no scarring there. And the reason that there's no contraction or scarring there is the blood vessels will come up. But because there's a second layer of polyurethane on the top, water is not lost through the wound. If your body loses water from somewhere, that sends a signal to the body that there is a wound that needs to be closed. And that's when fibrosis and scarring occurs. And that's why most of those people that you would have seen from the Second World War or the Vietnam War who were very badly burnt or extremely scarred, it's because whatever you do, the body's trying to heal that wound, and it's healing by scarring. By temporizing with this material, you don't get that response. And that's what's so unique about it. And the other thing that's unique about it is this. So around the outside of those fibres that John's put in these wounds are these things, and these are vascular endothelial cells. Vascular endothelial cells are baby blood vessels. So what this material is actually doing is creating blood vessel growth and formation in an unusual site. So I'm not a burn surgeon. I wasn't particularly interested in the other stuff that he was doing. I thought, oh yeah, what's all this about? When I saw this, I thought this is what we've been looking for, because this is creating a vascular supply potentially under the skin. And when he told me that the diameter of the fibres which degrade is 150 microns, which is the average diameter of a pancreatic islet, I thought what we need to do is try putting pancreatic islets into this space and see whether they can survive there outside of the pancreas and outside of the liver. So that's the basis of the grant. So just to recap, again, you can see the polyurethane seal at the very top. These are human biopsies, by the way. This is not an animal model. This has all been done in people. You can see it over there. And this is the concept. That's John. His face looks like the side of a tram, because you quite frequently see him on buses and trams advertising why South Australia is so good. He's a very nice fellow. This is the idea that we would potentially create with the matrix a site in the skin that we could then seed with the islet cells and then close with either a skin graft or with a single suture. The first version of this, which we'll plan to trial, will be with a skin graft rather than a suture, but I think with a bit of optimisation, that's probably what we're going to end up doing. And the nice thing about this is the blood vessels that we create last for years. So they're there for, we know, at least 5 to 7 years. So potentially, once you've created a site like this, you could actually go back and reseed it if you needed to. So that's an advantage. So we tested this in mouse models. So this is under the kidney capsule. I won't go to this in any great detail, but the really important thing here is that when we put some pig islets in, because we do a lot of work in the models in pigs, 400 days worth of survival. So that's over a year. Islets transplanted into this material are functioning successfully, and that's sort of really the best that you can do when you've rather than going to large animals, which we'll talk about in a minute. Large animal experiments were done with pigs, and the reason that we do large animal experiments with pigs is that, believe it or not, the best model for a human skin is actually a pig, and that's not. I'm not saying we're all pigs, but pigs have got a fatty skin like we've got, okay? Whereas mice have actually got a hairy skin, and monkeys have got hairy skin, but us, and believe it or not, whales and pigs are the only ones that have got fatty skin. So it was a bit too hard to do this in whales, so we settled for doing it in pigs. And we did a lot of experiments. To test all sorts of combinations that we thought we could translate into human treatment. That's what this is all about. Having done small animals to show proof of principle. And obviously this all goes through ethics, and it's peer reviewed, so other people have looked at this and said, oh, this is a reasonably good idea. All backed on John's 14 years of hard work in burns. Okay. So we've tested this in a number of situations. I won't go into the real details of it, but the really impressive thing with this is that we've been able to show in the skin now that we can get these very delicate cells that never survived outside of the pancreas to survive in a skin site for over 100 days. That's 3 months. It doesn't sound like a lot, but you appreciate when we start with the pigs, and they are beautiful. I love my pigs. They are really nice, and they're quite small, and they're extremely cute. And by 3 months, I can tell you, they're huge. So to actually to do these experiments are actually quite complex. And they create a lot of blood vessels. Same thing that we showed before. That's a chromogranin, which is a stain for insulin-positive cells. So this is, you shouldn't see insulin-type cells in the skin of. Oh my God. I'm going to run out of time. In the skin of a pig like that. If you can just click on this one, I just want to show you these blood vessels in humans. There we go. So that's actually human, and those are functional blood vessels that somebody's got that BTM in there. So what and this is the 100-day survival. We've been able also to show with histology all the different cell types. So these are blood vessels with insulin-positive cells in the skin, glucagon, so the important counter-regulatory hormone, as well as insulin's present there. And we've been able to put human cells into the pigs and show that they survive in the same system. These are human islets that have gone into one of our models and have been very successfully vascularized. So it looks pretty good. And not only that, but we've been able to show, this is C-peptide, that when we transplant islets, human islets into one of these pigs, we can see function out to at least a month, which is very positive. And the only reason we stopped this was because these are very difficult things to take care of animals in this sort of situation, because obviously they don't understand what you're doing. It's not experimentally easily. So what we'd like to do is go from that very large clinical team, 5 days in hospital, very dangerous, to this, which is something that we think we can do as an outpatient. So come in, have the procedure done, come back 3 weeks later, have the islet cells infused into the skin as an outpatient. Okay, so not actually be admitted to my beautiful hospital. Okay, a complete alternative to how we've been doing it. So this will be our first in man. So we're looking for people with type 1 who've had a kidney transplant. Now there's 2 reasons for that. The main reason is that these people are already taking the drugs, so we're not putting them at any risk by giving them the drugs to stop the rejection, because if you give drugs without, that's a dangerous thing. And not only, but the other reason, which is slightly philosophical, is that these people are generally over about 50 and have had usually 50 years of type 1 with people saying something's coming, and nothing's ever come. So this is something that will come, assuming that ethics lets me do this, and I think they will. And the JDRF International funds it, and you could all write to them and say, please fund this research, that we should start this here in Adelaide next year. Very quickly, I'll show you Jane Doyle. You know Jane Doyle, if you just click on that. This is the final thing we've been doing.
An Adelaide boy's undergone an Australian first transplant. 7-year-old Gary Wanganeen suffered from hereditary pancreatitis and had to rely on strong painkillers until his mum found the surgery on a Facebook forum. His pancreas was removed and sent to Melbourne, where islets were extracted, the cells were returned to Adelaide and infused into his liver the same day.
That's fantastic, because that actually describes exactly what happened in 40 seconds. And I think everybody can actually understand it. And I could stand here probably for an hour trying to explain that, and Jane Doyle did it just so brilliantly. So we're the only place in Australia that offers this procedure, which is auto transplantation. So it's building on the skills that we got through the JDRF, through the Islet program, and are now branching out to deal with hereditary pancreatitis. Also would be applicable for somebody who had cystic fibrosis, for example, as well. We'd be able to do exactly the same thing. Now, the particular gene that causes this is a very nasty gene, and it causes cancer of the pancreas by the age of 40. So if you've got this gene, you will get cancer of the pancreas at 40. If we do this, we prevent the cancer and we prevent the diabetes. So it's extremely powerful treatment, and we are the only people that are actually doing it. I'm going to skip over this because I know I'm running out of time. but it is important. I won't show you that one because it's leading on to firstly saying, well, we're actually doing this, and this is something that's now happening. It's the only place in Australia you can get it. It's a very good procedure in terms of getting people off opiates. If you've got chronic pancreatitis, people are usually on high-dose opiates. By doing this, we prevent the diabetes that would happen, and we're able to get them off. So that actually really alters people's lives and gets people back to work. So it's absolutely fantastic. So and we've got more experience now than the other two centres, and we're the only place that's actually doing it. Very quickly, how you process the islets, whether you're doing it for islet transplantation or auto transplantation, you require a processing facility. And this is the clean room, which is in a biospheric system at the St Vincent's Institute, where everything's currently done, from most of our stuff done. Some done in Westmead, but most of our stuff's done at St V's, and they're really good guys. And that's just a pancreas being digested. But the problem that we've got with this is that we don't have one of these at the moment in South Australia. We don't have one. So whenever we do this, my guys start at 5 o'clock in the morning. The surgeons are up very early. We get the pancreas out by about 10:30. We put it, I'm not joking, we put it in a taxi with one of my scientists who drive to the airport. They catch a plane. We're specially cleared through Qantas. So the pancreas sits, I'm not joking, behind the pilot and it goes through, not x-rayed. We've got all this clearance stuff going on. Gets to Melbourne, an hour into the isolation centre, work like mad, absolutely work like mad. Isolate the islets, back on the plane the same day, back, and then we infuse them back into the patient, usually about 9:30 at night, and it's finished usually by about 10:30, after which we all go to the line for a beer because we've had a really long day. And we really do. That's part of the success, is the beer at the end of it. But the really wonderful thing, and I know you will have heard of the Hospital Research Foundation, that's the home lottery. Support the Hospital Research Foundation, because the Hospital Research Foundation is putting $1.4 million into us to buy our own facility, which we will establish here in Adelaide to do this procedure for the benefit of South Australians. But more than that, also for the benefit of the region, because there isn't anybody doing this in the whole of Southeast Asia. So if we can make this work and get it up and running, and I plan to fund Australians through, I've got a mechanism where that will work, we could potentially get people coming to Adelaide, not going to Melbourne or Sydney, but coming to Adelaide to have access to these sort of technologies. And that, I think, is the new form of economy that we need to be trying to build. If we're not manufacturing anything more, let's use our smarts to try to make things better for everybody else. So this has been my sort of goal since I got back in 2003, is to have all of these things. We've got the kidneys, we've got the pancreases now, we've got the islets, we've got the auto islets, we've got a lot of research going on, we're training people, and that's really where it goes. That's what a biospheric system looks like. You can put them in all sorts of crazy places. You don't need a Taj Mahal. It doesn't have to go to the Royal Adelaide. That's one in New York that I visited. That's in a converted car garage on the Upper East Side, okay? Because the big thing about this is the sterile areas inside the box. It doesn't have to be in a big thing. So that's what we'll have. And hopefully, come March next year, when we have an event, we'll be able to invite you to come and see it, because it looks pretty, it's pretty space age. It's pretty cool. And it's something that I think is pretty exciting. So these technologies are here. They're happening. They're functioning. The trial I'm really excited about, and hopefully that'll be happening, within the next 6 weeks. To get access to this, obviously your endocrinologist, okay, will tell you whether you're suitable for some of these things. And the educators, of course, will be able to point you in the right direction. Contacts at Royal Adelaide, Women's and Children's, and Flinders. So it's a combined effort. It's not just me. It's across the whole state, and a lot of really good people. So that's what's new. If you've got, I think it's, I can't remember where National Geographic's on, but if you go to Miracle Hospitals, which is on Nat Geo, you can see the story of one of the auto transplants we did, so which was pretty good. These are the people that do the work. I just do the talking, and it's a collaboration from Melbourne, Sydney, Alberta, and obviously Royal Adelaide, University of Adelaide, and John Greenwood, and that's it.